Welcome to the lighter side of the spectrum, the podcast that celebrates the multiple hats we wear and the juggling acts we perform in life. Whether you're parenting kids and teens on the autism spectrum, navigating the ever-evolving healthcare industry, or building a more inclusive and impactful world, this is your space to find connection, inspiration, and growth. Together, we'll share stories, tackle challenges, and explore how innovation and inclusion create better outcomes for everyone. Because no matter the spectrum, there's always a lighter side. Now here's your host, David Coffer.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to the lighter side of the spectrum. I'm David Coffer, and today's episode is a big one. We're talking about something that every parent in the special education world needs to hear. A family took on one of the largest school districts in the country over their son's right to be understood, accommodated, and educated based on who he actually is. And they won. Not a quiet settlement, not just a partial compromise, not a vague promise to do better. They won their due process hearing against Fairfax County Public Schools on every issue presented. For families listening who have been told directly or indirectly that these school districts are too powerful, that the odds are too long, that it's not worth fighting, or that your child's communication will never be taken seriously, this episode is for you. And my guests today are the two people at the heart of this story. I have Elizabeth Zielinski, advocate, someone I respect tremendously, one of my earliest and favorite guests on this podcast. Elizabeth has been fighting alongside Jill Janson and her family through this long fight. And of course, we have Jill, who is Zach's mom, very much part of this. Zach is a non-speaking speller student whose intelligence, communication, and right to meaningful access was at the center of this case. What makes this story even more powerful is that Zach did not just want to fight this for himself. He wanted the hearing open to the public. He wanted the results public. He wanted it to help other spellers and non-speakers coming behind him. And that matters because this is not just a win for one student. This is a public record of what so many families already know. Non-speaking does not mean non-thinking. Apraxia is not the lack of intelligence. Communication access is not a bonus service, and schools do not get to deny a student's mind just because they don't understand the way a student communicates. So we're going to be thoughtful about some legal boundaries here. We're not going to get into personal attacks or impugn anyone's character. We're just going to talk about what's on the public record, some lessons, and really the human story behind the case, because this is a story I think is the part every parent needs to hear. So with all that being said, Elizabeth, Jill, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I mean, this is such an important message and such I think, an important milestone for our community and the education system at large. There's a lot to talk about, but why don't we kind of start at the beginning? And, Jill, I'll ask you, first of all, if you could take us back to the beginning. What was happening with Zach at school that made you decide that this isn't just an IEP disagreement, something bigger that you had to escalate?
Well, Zach had been spelling for a number of years, but we managed to get it in the IEP. And as a parent, you're like, oh, okay, like, great, let's celebrate. My job is done. It's in the IEP.
Right, it's there.
Yeah. And the problem came when he transitioned from middle school to high school. The high school team, they just kind of said, I don't understand, or they feigned that they didn't understand. And they just kind of delayed and obstructed and intimidated quite a bit. It was very clear, I had Liz by my side the whole time, but it was very clear that they were not respecting me as the parent or her as members of the IEP, that we were trying to be very collaborative, saying, okay, maybe you don't understand. Maybe you haven't heard of this methodology. Maybe you haven't seen letterboard communication or anything like that, but we're happy to show you. We're happy to teach you. We're happy to, collaborate with you and show you how it's going to be done in practice. What are the needs? What does the training look like? All of it. And they, they're like, okay, yeah, sure, we'll schedule something. Like it was a lot of that, like kick the can down the road. And by the time, we were a couple months in, it was very clear that they had no intention to implement. And, after the first semester, Zach was getting failing grades, and he didn't want to go to school anymore. He had a lot of school refusal. And that was another ball of wax, like his emotional,
Oh, I'm sure.
decline.
Yeah.
But, because he was so, it's been such a roller coaster. You're like, oh, great, we get in the IEP. I'm going to start high school and I'm going to have this finally
Oh, yeah.
and he thought it was like, a brave new world, and that it was disappointment after disappointment and empty promises and broken promises and lots of that. So, that's how it all started.
Okay. And to be clear, what was in the IEP? Can you talk about that? Like what was promised in the IEP?
That he would have a one-on-one aide that would be a trained and trusted partner, trained in his communication methodology. And we chose our words very, very particular. And modeling after the Sturgis case and things like that, thanks to Liz.
Right.
But just to make sure that there were no loopholes. We were very clear in what he needed.
Okay. And now, Liz, you're a seasoned advocate, and as you're watching this play out, what are your thoughts, and what were kind of your strategies in terms of advising Jill and trying to work with the school district?
It's funny, as I heard her tell that story, and there's certain meetings and days that are just burned into my memory. And I'll never forget the meeting that they did finally document this in his IEP. And it was waning days of middle school. And we walked out of the building, and Jill was, we did it, we're done. And I remember saying, let's not go there yet.
Don't celebrate quite yet. Yeah.
Now, if and that was 3 years ago, and if almost to the day, and if the me of 3 years ago, I didn't expect it would be smooth. I didn't expect it would be as hard as it was. The other one that stands out is when she mentioned about the intimidation, because we convened right before school opened, about, 2-3 months later, mid-August, right before school opened, and they're supposed to tell you who is going to attend a meeting in the meeting notice before you go. It doesn't happen in every district, but they're pretty on top of it here. Mm-hmm. But they don't give you the name, they give you the position. So it might say school psychologist, principal designee, special educator, right, general educator. And there were 9 names on there, which stood out. There were 9 slots, which, okay, that's a lot, but whatever. We walked into the room, there were 22 people. And
I'm not surprised, but yeah, that's pretty incredible. That's incredible.
And what they had done was there was like 3 or 4 people in each of those roles that they had announced. There were like 2 OTs and 3 procedural folks and whatever. Anyway, you don't have to know me for very long to know that intimidation is not the tactic that will go easily for you.
Yeah. Right.
If anything, it fired me up.
There's a boomerang approach there, I think.
Exactly. If that word does not mean what you think it means. But part of what drives me in this is not just my it's not just that personality and the fact that I really am, called to the work that I do, but I'm the parent of a speller myself. And, my speller's older than Zach. And when he started spelling, I think a little younger, I'm not sure. But when we approached the school, when my now 20-year-old was in 5th grade, it was a whole different world for letterboard users. And there just was no way. There was no way. And that added to the fact that Evan wasn't particularly interested in me fighting that fight. But now when I advocate for a case like Zach, and my son and I, Evan and I, have talked about this, is, part of what drives me is I'm doing for others what I couldn't do for him. Mm-hmm. And, he always tells me not to worry about that because it's not what he wanted. And that's great. But, it's the redhead in me can't let go. And dang it, I'm going to get these rights for those that want them. Right.
Right.
So in my back to your original question, in my thought process, I'll tell you again, with the wisdom I have now, I might have handled it a little bit differently, but for the most part, I don't have a lot of regrets. One of the things that Jill said was, we're not familiar. We don't know. This is new to us. And, we took that on good faith. And that actually ended up being a critical piece in the case later on, which we can talk about as we get, further into the storytelling. Yeah. But what the language that we put in that initial IEP was, we were careful to preserve some of the language that echoes the Americans with Disabilities Act. So we didn't directly cite the law, but we did say that Zach has communicated that this is his primary and preferred means of communication, and the way that he accesses functional communication, through his academics at school. I don't forget the exact language. We did have, trained, trusted, known somebody who knows him and is trusted by him, very carefully worded. And, that's one of the things parents ask me a lot is, what's that verbiage? Give me that verbiage. And I try to hesitate from scripting it because there's no single roadmap to get where you're going. Right. It is very conditional on your circumstances. And so if I give you my script and you use my script, it's not going to be a silver bullet. But I do think that it's critical to walk as close up to the line of naming the model and falling just short of naming it. Some school districts will let you name it. Sometimes you can get it in there anecdotally by saying, this is what the parent reports they use at home. They generally will not allow you to cite a particular program, but
right.
So it doesn't cite that program.
I think that's an important lesson. I think parents need to learn, right, and understand that, because I think we did that again years ago. Now it's hard to believe it's been over 3 years for us as well. But you don't go marching in and saying, we want to implement spelling to communicate. It's right. That's not what you do. Don't do that. What you want to do is
the discussion ends. Go ahead and do it. You won't get further.
Well, yeah. No, you want to be careful with the language that you use.
And someone has justified. Special education regulations do not allow parents to prescribe instructional strategies.
Right.
However, that's where, I hear my friend.
Yeah.
That's where the ADA language is so critical, because unlike IDEA, the ADA does allow you to prescribe a specific methodology. So that's part of, that overlap.
Right. Okay. So moving forward, what was the next step here? Then what happened? They're high school. They're just kind of kicking the can down the road, right? And you're like, okay, time's a wasting. Zach is, frustrated. He's not getting the education, or, is he sitting in classes, Jill? Was he just with no accommodation, basically? How was that looking?
Yes. And he was in what they call category B classes, which are self-contained classes. In Fairfax County, it's a unique terminology. It's low incidence, basically people that are profoundly disabled that are in category B classes. And so he wasn't getting access to gen ed curriculum, or even what they call category A, which is, a lesser, I guess, a least restrictive environment of the two, Cat A and Cat B. So he wasn't getting any, he asked for a ton of electives. He was like, oh yay, I get to take electives in high school. And he had like a list of 11 in descending order of what his priorities were. and none. It was life skills, all life skills.
Oh, all life skills.
And he's like, I had that in middle school, and I know how to brush my teeth and put on deodorant. Like, just stop.
Counting change. Remember, is counting change.
Yeah, his math goals were making change for $1, and then we're gonna increase the challenge and make it make change for $2 and make change for $5.
Wow. And that literally makes my skin crawl. It just brings back so many bad memories for Stone.
Us speller parents are easily triggered by those stories, aren't we?
It's unbelievable. So obviously there was not the presumption of competence there. I mean, that's one of the obstacles, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You okay?
Good.
Good.
Hi, Stone. So that's, if I just pick up from there, Jill,
Yeah.
we were not long into September, about a month into school, and I filed a state complaint. In special ed, for those that aren't familiar, state complaints versus administrative due process, there's some overlap involved, but typically speaking, a state complaint is a procedural violation, the letter of the law. You were supposed to do this, you didn't do it, start doing it. Whereas due process, administrative due process, is a procedural, or excuse me, substantive violation. And that is, we think this is right, they think that is right, we need a neutral third party to determine. So the first step for us was this procedural violation, failure to implement the IEP. And we prevailed in that. That takes about, what did it take? About 90 days all told, between the briefs back and forth and additional evidence and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And I remember,
September. Yeah, it was September.
we filed in September.
December, we got our result.
Yeah, which was like the day before the school district broke for winter break, which was also critical because the way Virginia defines the number of days they have is business days. And when you're over the winter holidays, there are a lot of days that are business days that schools are not open. So our schools are closed for 2 weeks, but only 2 or 3 of those are actually bank holidays. So those days count towards whatever 30-day limit or 15-day limit they have to start working. So they missed that entirely. And then they lied about it to the Virginia Department of Education. They followed up by the deadline when we were supposed to have met, and we hadn't even been contacted yet. And what they told VDOE was that they'd been trying to get in touch with us to schedule a mutually agreeable time. So I told the compliance officer, we haven't heard crickets. So the compliance officer went back to the district and said, we want to see your call logs. And over the course of the next, I think, 2-3 months, asked for it twice. And to this day, 3 years later, or 2.5 years later, still, they have not been able to produce those call logs because they don't exist.
Wow.
That's another important lesson. School districts lie.
Yeah.
I mean, parents do too. Everybody lies. House will tell you everybody lies. But I think we have this idea that these systems are paragons of virtue. And, I do think that the people working in these capacities, I don't think I know, they're in incredibly demanding fields with relatively low pay. I think it's that and teaching, special ed and social work are the lowest ratio of cost to enter the field and predicted lifetime income in the field. So probably a lot of these people, overworked, underpaid, burdensome student loans. I'm the child of a special educator. I have empathy for that. But sometimes that leads to bad choices, which include maybe misrepresenting facts in order to keep the trains going in the direction you want them to go in. And we experienced a lot of that.
Well, I think from my experience or observation, I should say, not necessarily just experience, and I'd be interested in your perspective. I think a lot of the individuals in special education are not necessarily the problem when it comes to these types of situations. It's more at the administrative level that you run into, I think, a lot of these problems, because it seems like this is when you get into cost and implementation and things that they just either, don't want to be bothered with, or, it's going to require work or money or something like that. I think that, again, a lot of the special educators themselves are fairly open to doing whatever it takes. I mean, that's why they're there, to help the kids.
I mean, I always say the dopamine hit for a teacher is watching that light bulb go off over a kid's head. And that's what drives them every day. And with letterboards, they get to see it all day long, every day. So if they come into the question with a truly open mind, they're very enthusiastic. And I agree with you. It's rarely ever the teachers, because for them, it's potentially an opportunity to really educate a young mind. But you're right. It is perceived to be this burdensome expense, and it's not, but I understand it's perceived that way.
That's the perception. Okay, so we're still in Zach's freshman year, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So
well, again, we right before Christmas, we're like, yay, Christmas came early. We want our VDOE complaint. Now they have to implement, right? It's going to happen now. No. So as Liz mentioned, they completely blew through the whatever it was, 2 weeks, 30 days, and then they finally had a meeting in February. And in February, they said, okay, yeah, we'll come up with a corrective action plan per the VDOE complaint officer. And, but, the complaint officer awarded Zach compensatory services as part of the corrective action plan. But when we had this meeting, they're like, we don't think compensatory services are really necessary. And I said,
but say why.
But the complaint officer said he's entitled to. It's not a subjective opinion. They're saying he's do this. So what are you providing? No. He had access to multimodal communication, so he's not entitled to it. So again, we leave the table. Liz reaches out to the complaint officer and said, hey, I think these were mandatory, right? And she's like, absolutely. And then the school district got their, wrist slapped again by the complaint officer saying, no, this is not subjective. This is mandatory. So it was constant. It was just constantly like this. Like you just, we get a glimmer of hope. Something's going to happen. And then, oh, no, we're not going to do it. We're just going to delay it. And now we're in March, and now we're in April. And now
you're wrapping up freshman year.
Well, his entire freshman year, no communication partners, no access to gen ed, nothing. I mean, he is just sitting there like a lump in special education classes, and his mental health has deteriorated beyond, a kid that I could recognize anymore. And nobody seemed to care.
And Jill, I'm just curious. So are you Zach's communication partner as well, or do you work with him at home? So during this, you were able obviously to talk to him, and which I'm sure helped to a certain degree, right? But you can get a read on like, hey, or tell him like, I'm sorry, Zach, like this is what we're trying to do, and keep him in the loop, right?
Right. And actually, that you bring up the point about the communication partner is because the school wasn't providing him with one, because he was failing all of his classes, I was doing my damnedest to try to keep him up to speed with all of his assignments. And I'm working for hours every night, every weekend, just trying to go through his entire school day the best I could and get his responses to assignments, because I'm the only one that can communicate with him.
Right.
I mean, not the only one, but at least, at home, communicate with him. And so we're turning in assignments, and the school would not accept them. They basically said, they said to me, I quote, unless it's done in between the four walls of this school, we cannot accept it.
Oh my God.
He has to demonstrate that he has this skill before we will accept him working on it at home. And just to demonstrate that he has a skill in school.
Right.
To which we were like, yeah, so give him a communication partner.
Yeah, right.
If you did your job, I wouldn't have to be doing this, and again, we're all coming off of COVID from just, a couple years prior, where we were all virtual. So you were accepting the assignments just fine just 3 years ago, so why are you not accepting assignments from home now?
It's not even just that, but how many students are taught a concept in a class? They haven't demonstrated mastery of that concept, but they're given a homework assignment, and their homework is accepted.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
just dumbfounded. Right, that's kind of the nature of homework. So often, Liz, is you go teach it in class, you go home, you work on it, whatever. Back in our day, we'd have textbooks. We look at and that was it. Like, you didn't have to demonstrate. There's no other category of student that has to demonstrate proficiency at something before. I mean, like, that's preposterous. Wow. Okay.
I mean, there were many different moments like that too. For example, we did do a demonstration at one point. Zach, I always counsel to be very careful about those, but we did do one, and Zach was willing to rise to the occasion, which he did. And I don't know, that was maybe an hour that we did this demo, Jill. And after months, literally months of trying to schedule it. And we asked, is there anything you want to see before we wrap up? Like any question you have for Zach? I think, no, we're good. The very next meeting, the same person said, well, I didn't really see what I wanted to see. We asked you at the end of this, did you see everything? And you said yes. What?
I mean, that's not even
was your
acting in
moment.
good. That's not even acting in good faith at that point.
Correct.
And timeline wise, again, we offered a demonstration from the first ambush IEP in August of 2023. And this demonstration was finally scheduled in the middle of February of 2024. That's how long it took them.
Yeah. How many times did they cancel? 3?
Yeah.
And then how many people did they have in the demo? Who was involved in the actual?
Oh, then it was arguing who they wanted in the demo. Like it was everything. Argument.
That is actually a critical part of the case because we said it had to be a small group for sensory reasons.
Sure. And that's what I was wondering.
We also said, we are happy to do multiple demos if you have a number of people that you want to see this, but each individual one needs to be small. And we would like to prioritize the people who have hands-on anticipation of using this method. And so the first list that they send us was, a central office administrator who is, 3 tiers up in the org chart and doesn't work at the school or anything. And I remember asking, they wanted to video it. We said no to that, but Jill says no to videos of her kids at school regardless. So that wasn't related. And we said, why? And they said, well, we want to use it for training purposes. We said, well, this isn't a training video. You can't learn how to.
Yeah.
Lots
they haven't
of
even
moments.
accepted it yet. I mean, like they're not even implementing it, and they're claiming it's going to be a training video.
I mean, they thought what they thought was going to happen was they were going to get proof of influence. That's what they thought was going to happen.
Of course. Right. Yep.
And they didn't. And I guess they had to re-strategize after that. I don't know. But anyway, they had a year to implement the corrective action plan, and they didn't do that either.
I want to get back to the demo real quick because I'm really curious about that. So you did the demo. What was the response? Because, we all among us, we all know we've seen this. We talk, right? Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes like you literally see people's brains fry when they come in with a presumption, right?
And to be clear, I was not the CRP for that demo. I purposely, did not. Yeah. So, so we had Kelly, who's a certified practitioner of S2C, and she, scheduled herself to drive to the school, which is not around the block, and be there for the full hour to do the demonstration. So,
okay. And so
absolutely stone-faced, absolutely stone-faced.
Okay. Which is kind of appalling, right? Like, which is kind of like, okay, continue.
And I don't want to cut to the chase, but what's interesting is when he testified, and when you mention about, people's brains explode, you could see it on the hearing officer's face. That's what was happening to her as she watched it.
Well, let's
I don't want to
cut to the chase, but let's let's go ahead and jump ahead. So why don't we talk about, because then we have to get through like sophomore and junior year of more kicking the can, I take it.
Yeah. So sophomore year, they identify 2 instructional assistants that will, first it was 3, and there was a different person. So, but basically 2 to 3 people that took the first 2 to 4 hours of virtual training to be a CRP. And that's just like, this is what apraxia 101 and S2C 101 and the parts of your brain and motor versus speech and all of that. So they took that training, and then they swapped the person out, and then they took that training. And then it just kind of sat there. And so Kelly, who was the trainer as well as Zach's CRP, was just like, okay, well, you should really come into the clinic. We have standing appointments on Monday afternoons, and you should work directly with the student, using this methodology, and I'll over the shoulder coach you, and that's the fastest way to progression, and then we got the pushback of, well, these are staff members that have a contract and they can't leave the confines of the school. They can't, they cut out at 3:00. They can't work at 4:00. Like, it was one like hurdle after another, and Kelly, she sees, 40 other kids in a clinic week, like she
Right.
can't, will take 2 hours and just say, oh, sorry, this kid, I'm going to go drive, as much as she would love to, and so
Yeah,
we're trying to
right.
show them like the logistics of this. Like, it's easier for you to come to Herndon to this clinic than it is for Kelly to like drive out there and then drive back in time
Leave
for
her
the next
business.
clinic hour.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so basically they just got virtual training, and then that was it.
And they just
So-
thought they were good.
And they kept asking, like, so like they were very specific, like, well, how long does it take to get trained? And we're trying to, we give them the analogy. It's like riding a bike. Somebody might learn to ride a bike in 2 hours. Some might take 5 months. Like, it just really depends. And also practice. You need to practice. You need to do this every day and practice. And how are they practicing if they're not getting any hands-on training, or are they implementing and making mistakes and then ingraining those mistakes, so it was, it was basically sophomore year was all of that, where Zach couldn't, one of the IAs was making better progress than the other, but he was not able to even answer a multiple choice at all. Known responses on the 3 board, and that is it.
So was he still, again, in the life skills for the most part, sophomore
Yeah.
year?
Yeah, there were I think they like threw us a bone with an elective, and
Like an art class or something?
yeah, something like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was still just more of the same, where he's like, I have so much to say and I have no means to say it.
So I'm curious, at any time, did they bring up Asha's infamous position on spelling? Did they-
In the June IEP last year, at the end of his sophomore year, that was the first time it magically appeared. Wasn't part of the discussion of the IEP meeting. It was added after the fact into the IEP by the speech language pathologist. So
I'd like to add to that. We were always
Yeah.
very clear, and this is a strategy tip in some ways. And I hesitate to call it strategy because that implies that there's some
like a
maneuvering
trick
occurring.
or maneuvering, right?
Yeah, and it's not. But the ASHA position is about the acquisition of the skill. Once a student fluently communicates, you no longer require speech and language pathology services. And so the ASHA position becomes irrelevant to a fluent student who's communicating. Now, culturally, are you still going to get pushback? Absolutely, yes. But we could demonstrate his skill. And so it seems absurd that the speech language pathologist who is there to help him learn how to communicate has relevance in his fluent communication. So what we did was we were very clear with her. In fact, I think I even brought it up initially because it's always better to get ahead of the objections rather than wait for them and be proactive, not responsive.
Yeah.
And when it first came up, I spoke to her directly. I said, look, I would never expect you to put your credentials at risk because of this. So we are, out of respect for that, you don't have to have any part of this. So, if you want to come to the meeting and talk about his skill acquisition on the device, perfectly fine. But we're not asking you to take part because we recognize that it has professional implications for you that, we don't want to ask you to take on. Wasn't that nice of us? And
Oh,
as a
goodness.
result, she's largely stayed out of those discussions. But I would stand by that, not as a strategy, but as a fact. It's, if you have fluent communication, then why do you have a speech language pathologist involved? Doesn't
Right.
make sense to me. But I will say too, like one of the fallacies that people talk about with that ASHA statement is that a speech pathologist will lose their license if they do this. And that is not true. In fact, even speech pathologists believe that to be true. The state in which you reside that licenses you, they give you your license. ASHA doesn't give you a license.
No.
ASHA does give you a certification, that CCC SLP. Some states do require you to have that CCC in order to qualify for the SLP, but not all of them do. And Virginia is one that does not require it. There are SLPs in Virginia who do not have the CCC designation. Elizabeth Vossler is one of them. So, depending on where you are, you do not lose your license.
No, but there is definitely heavy language used by ASHA.
Yes.
There's the threat of censorship. I mean, I forget that, like they basically say they expect you to be a member, not necessarily of a CCC, but to abide by what they call their code of ethics, right? And if they see what they consider to be a code of ethics violation, that they may take action. Now, to your point, Liz, I don't think any of us have heard of any action that has been taken, but I think that there's that implied threat that certainly I've heard SLPs concerned about, for what it's worth.
Yeah, and I think that's valid, right? Because it is a credential in their field. I think it's one of the, one of my sidebar soapboxes, which I won't bore you with, is it's one of the fundamental issues with related services because they blend the lines between educational and medical. And ASHA is speaking from a more empirical medical position when they say you can never do this. And education is messier than that and more creative than that. And it's one of the inherent difficulties in those fields in the educational setting. OT is another one. The only difference with OT is that because it's a motor-based skill, occupational therapists are generally fully understanding of exactly why this works and exactly what the apraxia is doing to their body. But, that was how we handled the speech pathologist on the team. And she's still on the team. She still comes to the meetings. Actually, she showed up at an educational session I taught about a month ago, completely separate. And here's the speech pathologist coming to hear me teach a class about how to have collaborative IEP meetings. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So that's a good strategy to consider in terms of, like you said, kind of giving them an out if they're looking for that, depending on.
It's more than that too, though, David, because what it does is it deflates their power. There's a SpongeBob cartoon about, I have 2000 kids from the 2000s, and SpongeBob is a regular quote. There's a scene, though, where one of the characters says, how people who don't know what they're talking about just talk really loud, and then Plankton goes, yes. And that happens. That happens in the dynamic around the table. And a speech pathologist will speak with certainty. And because they are the speech pathologist, we have to defer to their expertise. So it deflates some of that. And it says, it allows some balance toward, it also shows the team, you're not just hearing this for the first time that ASHA is opposed to this. You understand it, you can respond to it factually, and you can put it in context.
Yeah. So while this is going on, Jill, I'm curious, how are you handling it all, kind of emotionally? How are you keeping Zach anchored and, trying to manage that process?
That was difficult because, every time I thought we were making some strides forward, we would be, bounce back and, and I would come out of a meeting either completely deflated or, completely feeling hopeful. And it was this constant roller coaster. And I would be like, okay, it's going to happen, dude. It's going to happen soon. It's going to happen. And then it didn't. And, it was really this year, his junior year, where things started to become a little more hopeful because there was, there was some more training. His IAs, we had to go through the IEE process, the individual education evaluation, that the school paid for. We used one of their neuropsychologists that were on their approved list, and he allowed the use of the letter board to take the psychoeducational battery of testing. And Kelly, his preferred CRP, was the one, so the doctor came to the clinic. We did it all there. He implemented, it was 6 weeks of testing because we could only do it in hour-long chunks. And, but it was amazing, his report, because it talked about like things like Zach doing calculus in his head without ever having a moment of calculus instruction.
I love that so much. That is so cool.
And, things like that where, even when he was like above average in something, he was above average in something he's never had exposure to. Mm-hmm. That was what was wild, and the IQ levels that he was able to come up with were off the chart. And, in his testimony and, in the case, but also when he presented his findings and his report in the IEP meeting, he said the best equivalent I can give you is Stephen Hawking. He said, in the case, he said, ask Stephen Hawking to explain a theory of relativity, and he'll use his communication board and explain it to you so that you can understand it, right? And now take his communication board away and have him explain it.
Right.
And that's what you've been doing to this student. Like, he has all of this prior knowledge. He's got all of this, capacity to learn, but taking away his communication method, he's unable to show you anything at all. Right. Any understanding, any proficiency, anything. So that was, very powerful, but Zach's IQ was on the same level. Sure. And, even when off the record, when the doctor called me to go over the results, he said, you have a remarkable young man. And I said, well, I'm kind of biased. I always thought he was remarkable. I said, but, doctor, I don't know how many non-speakers have you worked with, but they're all like this. I said, I can't say that. I mean, Zach's special and he's special to me, but honestly, I think they're all like this. And I said, I said, if you had worked with some more families of non-speakers, I think you will be impressed across the board.
I like to say, when this kind of happened with Stone as well, the unlocking and, like you said, kind of understanding how smart he was, all this, I said, yeah, he's one in a million, but he's also one of millions. Once you understand the population, I think, and that's only been proven to be true, right? As we all get exposed to more non-speakers and others, and that's not to say they're all genius level or anything like that, but I think that the level of intelligence that's revealed is pretty consistent.
Well, go ahead, Jill. I had some experience. So I have an older son, Justin, who is 21 now, and he is a minimally speaking or unreliably speaking a practicing autistic. And he didn't have this until COVID, where he advocated for himself. He's like, Mom, can I go to S2C2? And I was like, okay. And then it was like gangbusters. Like, now it's amazing.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
So, but I mentioned him because in fourth grade, there's a triennial in Virginia every 3 years. They say, okay, what kind of battery of testing does he still qualify? What does he qualify under? And so the school psychologist was telling me, okay, I would like to do some testing with Justin. And I was like, nah, I don't think so. Like, I would always decline psychology because I'm like, they have no means to test a nonverbal or minimally verbal person. Mm-hmm, And she was, somebody that I could tell wasn't up on the latest and greatest of things. So like, I knew she wasn't going to be thinking outside the box here. So, she's like, oh no, I'm not going to IQ test him. I just want to see, like, is he an auditory learner or a visual learner? And I'm like, and she convinced me that this might be some helpful information. And so I give the consent, but I said, you could test him to find out like what kind of a learner he is, but I want to make clear, I don't want an IQ test. And she's like, okay, no problem, no problem. And then we come to the IEP meeting. She did not give me the report ahead of time. She presented it at the IEP meeting. And she says, so I tested Justin, and, here are his strengths, here are his weaknesses. But he does score 42, so I consider him MR, and she used the term MR.
Oh my God!
And I mean, it took all of my restraint not to leap across that table. Like
I would have lost my.
I was shaking, and I went around the room. And I said, to the case manager, to all the teachers, to the speech language, to everybody, I'm like, so where is he in language arts? So he's in 4th grade. How's his spelling? Oh, he's spelling on a 7th grade level. Okay, great. How about math? How about this? I went around the room. Would any of his, demonstrated proficiencies, would you ever categorize him as MR? And they were like, oh, absolutely not. I said, so then why did you? And I just went every single person in that room. And the principal was just like, we'll pay for a private IE, because like I never wanted to see that woman again. Seriously. And so I was really gun shy, about any kind of psychological testing or IQ testing, because, I was just like, don't you do this to my other son. Absolutely not, so I never had him, like, I always declined the psychological assessments for Zach, because of what happened to his brother, Justin.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Anyone would have trauma after that, Jill. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. So let's jump ahead though. Let's get back to Zach and let's jump ahead. So again, progress isn't being made. Cans continue to be kicked down. When was the decision made to do the due process hearing? Let's talk about that, and then let's jump, because I think the hearing part is remarkable.
So I think the big precipitating event was so the neuropsychologist in June of last year presents his findings and said, we got to get this kid in like honors classes. He needs to be in gen ed. He needs to have, he needs to like give him everything. Yeah. And he said, we were trying to think of ways to, like, how could we get these IAs trained up here, and with all these constraints they keep putting on them. And he says, you know what? Ask, are these IAs working ESY, extended school year? Are they working summer school? And, this special ed lead said, I'll have to check to see if they are. It's optional. And he's like, well, if they are, why don't we use ESY as an opportunity for them to get more training, more hands-on with Zach? We'll adjust goals and things like that. And really just using that compressed 4 hours a day to so that he can start his junior year with fluent communication partners. That would be, and that was the psychologist's, the neuropsychologist, his idea. And all of us around the room were like, yeah, as long as, the IAs are doing ESY, let's do it. Let's, it was a great suggestion. And so, with the end of the school year happened, I get an email from his case manager. You're still going forward with ESY. Yes, absolutely. This is why we want to do it. This is, so please let us know if the IAs are doing it and all that. And I found, so then ESY was supposed to have an open house. And I'm like, I did not get an invitation. I don't know what the bus schedule is. I don't know what school it is. I don't know his teacher. So I call the ESY office and say, hey, and they're like, oh, well, we don't have him registered. I said, what do you mean you don't have? He's been in ESY ever since kindergarten. Of course he's, like, this is not a new thing. And I said, why wouldn't he be registered? And they're like, I don't know. And of course, everybody's on summer break. So I'm getting, out of office emails, and I'm going up the chain, and I'm asking the principal and the PSL and everybody. And they're like, sorry, we're out of office. Sorry, we're out of office. And so I called the ESY office again. And I said, here's the name of the 2 IAs that Zach works with. Are they working ESY this year? Yes, they are. Okay. And can you tell me what schools they're at? She tells me what schools they're at. And I said, okay, great. So finally, 3 weeks into the ESY July, the month, I get an email back from the PSL saying, oh, I heard you were trying to reach me, and I guess you had it all figured out. I said, no, not figured out. And she's so, I explained the situation. She's like, I don't know why he wasn't registered. I said, even if he didn't get registered, I said, it's still in his IEP, the state put IEP that I consent to, it's still there. So he should have been. Yeah, we dropped the ball. But the IAs, it was not my understanding that he would be working with his IAs. I'm like, what do you mean it's not your understanding? We have the meetings recorded. Am I taking crazy pills?
Why would you not? Yeah, right. Talking about gaslighting.
And so it was a lot of that. And sorry. And then they tried to say, oh, well, his IAs weren't working ESY. I said, no, that's a lie. And I know for a fact they are. Oh, well, they took contracts with primary school, like elementary, so they can't work with high schoolers. I said, no, because here's the schools that they were assigned to. Try again. And it was like a constant gaslighting, constant lies. And then finally they say, well, I guess we're going to have to owe Zach some compensatory because we dropped the ball. And at that point, Liz and I just looked at each other. We need an attorney. This is it. We can't keep doing this. We can't, the definition of insanity.
Right.
We can't do this anymore. So she gave me a great recommendation for Grace Kim, who was our attorney. And and then we started, talking and getting Grace up to speed. And then she filed due process in late September.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, did anything change once you brought in an attorney, or no? Interesting. So that didn't shake them at all. They're just like, okay, whatever.
No, we had go ahead. But
no, I was just going to say, this area is, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting an attorney, and they may or may not be in special ed. There's attorneys of all shapes and sizes. There's people in other fields who happen to have law degrees. So I don't think that has any kind of weight in particular culturally in this area, in this school district. It's just too common that, now I can't say it's, exclusively true, but in this case, I don't think it was particularly surprising that they didn't have much of a reaction. And, I do say as an advocate, sometimes when you go in as a parent, there is a difference between when you come accompanied, whether that's by an attorney or by an advocate. There is very much a difference. But at this point, almost 2.5 years into it at that stage, I think they were just sort of, okay, hit us with your next shot kind of thing. I don't know. But it didn't really change there.
Interesting. So let's jump ahead to the due process hearing, because that was monumental, right?
It was finally held in the middle of March. So filed due process in September. It actually gets scheduled in March.
Well, we made amendments. That's why we got delayed when we made amendments. It wouldn't ordinarily take that long, but by choice, we delayed some things.
Yeah, the last filed amendment was in December 31st or something. So March was the thing. Trying to remember if there was. We wanted, that we were assigned a hearing officer. And, she was coming from 4 hours away. And so, there was some scheduling issues. So, March, and it was, everyone agreed it was going to be a 5-day hearing. And, it was held,
which is long.
Again, as a parent, you're thinking
unusually long.
Yeah.
I'm
But
sorry, you were breaking up a little bit, Liz. So is that normal, or is that's not normal?
it's long. In due process hearings, they're usually 2 to 3 days.
Yeah,
It's
that's
unusual to have a 5-day.
okay. All right, go ahead.
and also like one of the things I had to learn is like, so you know, in your mind, like as a parent, I've never done this before, so I'm thinking it's going to be like a courtroom or something like that, and it was not. It was a defunct elementary school that it was now used for like, you know, like just overflow services, like maybe child find, maybe this, maybe that, and it had like window air conditioners that didn't work and they were loud as heck, and no elevator in the building, so not ADA compliant. And I mention this simply because one of Zach's IAs is in a wheelchair and couldn't testify in person because the building did not have an elevator.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Damn.
and let's not overlook here. This is a school district with 185,000 students. They have 200 buildings. They probably have 6 administrative office buildings. They just bought a brand new high school that they bought it. It was a high school for several years. It was emptied out. It is state of the art. They're opening it in August for the first year of Fairfax students. Standing empty, state of the art. Could have held the hearing there, but no.
Wow.
Instead, we used the little kid toilets and the
Oh my God.
yeah.
Oh yeah.
Wow. So accommodating.
Very, very. And
Yeah.
it's a cramped room. I mean, all of it. It was just did not meet my initial expectations of
Right. And I would
this
do
hearing.
it, Jill. I would expect, like I said, this nice courtroom or something, or at least a nice conference room and
Yeah.
They have those. They
accommodations.
just don't let us use them.
They just don't. Right. So 5 to
So-
so. Yeah. Go ahead.
So yeah, so it was, you know, scheduled for 5 days, and you know, we had 4 binders, 2 from the parent exhibits, 2 school district exhibits. We had like 5-inch binders.
Wow.
Every, like, you know, I had just even for the subpoena, like turning over emails and documents and videos and audios and recordings of every IEP meeting. I mean, it took hours and hours and hours just to compile the whole story, you know, like the whole thing. And so yeah, it was a lot of evidence to go through. And just, you know, I think we had like 3-4 witnesses total, and they, you know, came up with like a laundry list of like 25 people on the witness list, like anybody that had an FCPS badge, pretty much. Like, that's what it felt like.
Did any of the usual suspects testify on their behalf in terms of some of the? Yeah, Liz, you're. Yeah.
I had some favorites in there. Their strategy, and this is critical, I think, to others learning about this process and the takeaway. I don't know if they were just trying to obfuscate, but their strategy was clearly, there were 2 things that I believe, you know, I don't have access to their private records, but
Yeah.
2 things that I think their strategy was clearly, they were pitching that since Zach had made some progress, that he had an appropriate education. But that was never our claim. Our claim was failure to implement the IEP. And so the issue of progress is irrelevant. He could make some progress, no progress. He could make all the progress in the world. You're still not implementing the IEP. So that was one issue, I think. And again, I believe they did it to try to detract from the real issue, because I think that was their strategy.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing that I personally believe is true, and I say I personally believe because I have no hard evidence, but I believe that the school board's attorney deliberately tried to dysregulate Zach during his testimony. And I
That's
thought
huge.
it in the moment because they had extended the questioning far beyond what
Right.
was
I remember
agreed
hearing
upon.
about that. That's crazy.
But then, I had not heard their opening statements because I was a witness. I went right after Jill. You can't be there hearing the other witnesses until after you've gone. So I wasn't there when he made his opening statement. And when I went back and looked at the transcript, sure enough, in his opening statement, the school board's attorney said, "You will see later this week that Zach dysregulates easily." Well, this attorney's never met Zach.
And so what if he does? I mean, I don't understand what the point
Well,
was.
that's one point. That's one point, right?
Yeah.
But how could you know such a thing if you've never met him?
Right.
And nobody at the school at this point had ever seen him spell fluently. So they clearly were seeing him under times of duress. When he's spelling fluently, he's got a remarkable ability to remain regulated and at a minimum communicate his growing dysregulation so that it can be supported.
Yeah.
So I really do believe, and I'm I've made some public comment myself to school board committees, and I'm going to pursue it a little bit further. I really believe they weaponized his disability against himself, and I find that reprehensible. I believe that everybody in a legal battle has the right, even the requirement to pursue a robust defense. But the difference in an administrative due process from a criminal case, for example, is that in a criminal case, I don't have to go back and live with the person who stole from me, but Jill has to send her kid back to this school.
Right.
And there's got to be a line, there's got to be a line of what is not okay. He is a disabled student. And look, I don't know for sure. It is my personal opinion that they were attempting to show him at his worst so that the hearing officer would walk away and say, well, look how hard he is to manage. Of course they couldn't do it.
Right.
Well, that failed miserably because he didn't dysregulate.
So, one of the things that my attorney had worked out with the second chair for the school district was that she would ask Zach his direct questions, the direct examination questions ahead of time, and that we would videotape it and have a transcript of him answering. So you could see it visually so that it wouldn't fatigue him and that he would be fresh to answer the cross-examination questions from the district. And the second chair agreed to this with our attorney. So we booked extra hours with Kelly to videotape all of his answers to like about a dozen questions or so, and put it all together. And then on day one, or sorry, not day one, but on Zach's day of testimony, Grace brings out, here's the video exhibit, blah, blah, blah. And the first chair of the Fairfax County's attorney said, well, I didn't agree to this. And Grace is talking to the hearing officer. Yes, but your second chair did. Well, this is like predetermination. I'm not doing this, blah, 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 blah. And the hearing officer is just like, well, I thought this was agreed to. If it's not agreed to, then I guess you have to ask your questions. And so that put an additional burden on Zach.
Wow.
So he had to go through all those questions again. And that was like, let's say the first hour getting through the direct, then the second hour of going through the cross-examination, then another hour of redirect, or not even, I'm sure she tried to keep it as short as possible, but let's say a half hour, 40 minutes of redirect and then recross. And by that point, it was nearly 4 hours and he had 1 10-minute break.
What a rock star.
And by the end,
I've never seen anything like it.
I mean,
I've seen a lot of spellers in a lot of circumstances. And, I have never seen anything like it. It still gives me a sense of awe to think about what he did that day. I get chills just remembering it. It was Rockstar doesn't capture it because being a speller makes you a rock star because it is so demanding on you. But to do that under those conditions
for hours,
he won his case himself. And not every student can do that, and certainly there were other supportive elements. But one of the things that really sticks in my mind was he was starting to dysregulate. Grace noticed it. She said, should we draw this to a close because he's starting to...
Sounds happy.
Because good.
Yeah.
Can we bring this to a close? Because he's starting to dysregulate. He was scratching his face. And the school board's attorney said, just one more question.
And he asked the same question like 3 different ways. Like it wasn't like
he was
a novel
clearly,
question.
yeah. I mean, those intentions are very clear. And even like I would go back. I was going to ask Liz if you thought just the whole exchange, the first chair and the second chair, in terms of the questioning, if even that may have been part of the strategy too.
I believe that it was. I don't think for 1 minute that he didn't know exactly what had been agreed upon.
Right? Like that just seems ridiculous to even.
I don't believe for 1 moment. I mean, this is an outside counsel that the school district hires, and they really only do 2 things for the school district. One is some of the collective bargaining and these due process cases. And it has always been over years, this one attorney. And I don't know if he's sort of nearing retirement age, but they hired somebody a year or 2 ago, starting to train him into more of this lead role. And it was this second attorney that had made the agreement. There is no way that the lead attorney wasn't well aware of what his newly hired second had agreed to in a pre-hearing conference. No, it was all theater.
They'd be all over it. They'd be all over it for sure. 100%. But the good news is, ta-da, right? You won.
Well, yes. So I was going to say, there's 2 things, my takeaways from the due process. It was, I didn't expect, like, my brother's an attorney, and he was explaining, a lot of times, you want to tell your story. He's like, the way to tell your story is a deposition. But when you're in a due process hearing, you're not telling your story linearly. They're just like, asking questions like, okay, in 2023, this happened. 2025, this happened. Last week, something else happened. And you're like a ping pong ball all over the place. And it's like, you're like, oh my God, am I keeping all my facts straight? Am I keeping all my dates straight? And you're not telling a story. Like when you sit and tell the story and the full trajectory of what happened and how long things took and what was said and what was done or what wasn't done, it's very clear. And it's clear to everybody, what went down. But when you're jumping all over the place and they're just like cherry picking things, it's very frustrating because you're not able to tell your story. So I say that was the one takeaway. The other thing was, they usually have the parent testify first to set the story, I guess, or set some of the groundwork. And it was very difficult to sit for 5 days and have them mischaracterize things and say things that weren't said or done or whatever. And I'm just like, I want to be objection. That's not what I said. Like, it's very hard to sit there.
Oh, it would be so hard.
And it's like, I wish they called me today because then I can refute these other 15 things they just brought up. That was really hard to just sit there and bite your tongue and not roll your eyes and not reach across the table and string somebody. That was something, again, as a parent, I was not prepared for. I thought I was going to just sit there and tell the story and answer questions and they were going to poke holes and try to poke holes through my story, but that would just be a very linear telling, and it wasn't.
Interesting. I mean, it kind of gets back to motives and motivations and kind of assuming, right, that it's going to be one thing, kind of like what we think about with special education in general. You kind of think that it.
Yeah, the other wrench in the works was on the last day. Well, the night before, the school district attorney says, okay, I don't have enough time for all of my witnesses, so we're going to need a 6th day. And at this point, the hearing officer says, okay, well, I got to reach out to my administrative assistant and see when we could schedule this again. And she comes back and says, my next date is like June. And this is March. And I'm like, how much longer are they going to delay this? Because, okay, great, we have it in June. Wow. Then it's weeks that go by for their briefs. And then the hearing officer has an additional 30 days. We might not get a response until August, at this rate. And it's another year that goes by. I was so upset. Then going into Friday of the hearing, we actually were able to blow through a couple of witnesses quicker than we thought. And by lunchtime, everybody was like, we've got one witness left. I think we could finish up. And I'm like, really? We could finish? Yeah. And then by 4:30, we were almost finished with that witness. And the school district attorney says, you brought up some other things in this whole, questioning. So I really need to call a bunch of other witnesses that are on my list. I definitely need that 6th day. So again, that roller coaster, I started crying. I just was like, I was holding my breath for 5 days, trying to keep my stuff together. And by that point, I'm just like, I hate you all. I can't stand this anymore.
And he didn't even on the 6th day call all those people.
No, it's just that MO to just delay and kick the can down the road. And it's just so on brand. Like it just was so on brand.
However hard you think it's going to be, it's 100 times harder.
So, I mean, that's kind of a good lesson though, right? I mean, I think that's something people should take away. I mean, is it worth the fight, Jill? I'll just ask that question. I mean, you fought hard. Like this has been a long, hard fight. But at the end of the day, what do you tell parents?
It was, I really took Zach's lead on this because I'm like, this is your life. This is your education. What do you want? Do you want to throw in the towel? I mean, we had, resolution sessions and things like that to avoid going to a hearing or trial, so to speak. Do you want to take the pittance that they're going to offer you? Is that good enough to just get through high school, just get a diploma of some kind? Just like, let's just take whatever, breadcrumbs they want to offer. And he's like, no, he's like, and then what happens? I take that and I get an imperfect, solution for me, but then it doesn't do anything for anybody else. Mm-hmm. And it was Zach who said to me, I don't want this just for me. I want this for everybody behind me.
Remarkable.
And when I asked him, how did you have this, for lack of a better word, otherworldly stamina on the day you testified? How did you do that? And, it was the night before and the morning of getting personal messages from spellers. Like Liz's son, Evan, wrote a beautiful, heartfelt message to Zach. And we got texts and direct messages and Facebook posts and all that. Just like, hey, we're a speller family from Washington. We are praying for you. We are my son says this, my daughter says this. And I read every single post to him.
That's great.
And afterwards he's like, I felt all of the love in the room of all the people that came to the hearing and was here to support him. And I felt all of the love outside of that room. And that's what got me through.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. Well, I don't think we have time for all of our segments, but I do want to close because I do think that, again, especially knowing you, Liz, and Jill, I know you a little bit now, but let's do at least our tip of the week. I think that there's a walk away that we want people to come away with.
Hey, parents, gather around, it's time to speak. We're here with your tip of the week. Strategies and wisdom just for you. Autism parents, we know what you go through.
All right, it's time for our tip of the week, and I'm sure there's more than one that can come out of this, but let's see what we've got. Liz, we'll start with you.
So I would say one of the things that I learned from this process is that I have always counseled people, do not bring up letterboard use until you're ready to make the full ask. And my advice on that has changed. I say, talk about it as often as you like. Don't necessarily brand it. You can say, we are using letterboards. We're learning a lot. The inevitable resistance you get, tune it out, because the school district has if you're not, be very clear when you mention them. I'm not asking you to do anything. We're pursuing this privately. I'm asking for nothing from you. So if they push back, just let it go out the other ear. Okay, well, I appreciate your input, but this is something we're doing privately as a family. And the reason why is because one of the things that benefited us is that Jill had done exactly that. And in the early days of her case, after the dispute was escalating, they tried to defend why they didn't act faster by saying, well, this was so new and unknown to us. And in the hearing officer's decision, she said there was a lot of evidence that the parent had been talking about this for years. So don't try that you didn't know it was new and different. So I still say you cannot ask them to accommodate you until you are fluent. And that means multiple figures, multiple settings. But do not be fearful about talking about it, and do not be fearful of the resistance that you inevitably get. Just tell them, thank you for your qualified advice. This is something we're pursuing privately, not asking you to do anything about it. So thank you, and, move along.
You plant the seeds, so to speak.
Document that it started. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. All right, Jill, how about you?
It has to be about documentation. We got a wealth of information when we did a FOIA between the middle school and high school. And that was really important to find out what was being said behind your back. And also my second part about documentation is make sure that you don't, like, anything that you write, like, even if you say, oh, okay, well, we're just, trying to collaborate with the school, this is not going to go to due process, always think ahead that maybe this is going to be brought up in a court of law of some kind, because, you might be joking with a friend or something like, or you're friendly with some of these practitioners or, people like that. And you say something off the cuff and it's taken out of context and it can be used against you. And it's, maybe stick to voice and text. I don't know.
No, that's great advice. And it's, it's one of those things you hate to sound so cynical now, right? I don't think any of us like to be cynical, but you have to be realistic. And especially if you're in this space, we've seen all too often that, that schools aren't going to be as accommodating as we may hope that they would be. And so it's better to kind of prepare for the worst than, just assume everything's just going to go hunky-dory.
And I add something to that what you just said, David, because one of the things that came up in my testimony, it's so interesting that you say, what can and will be used against you. With great dramatic effect, the school board attorney said to me, are you telling me that these individuals who work hard every day to serve students with disabilities and who, unlike you, actually have a license in education, are you telling me that they're not acting in good faith? And my answer was, not all of them, no. And I don't think that went over real well with the hearing officer in the moment I said it, but by the end of the week, I think she understood why I said it.
She saw it,
and and it's true. They are not all acting in good faith.
No, it's just kind of one of those sad realities that just, again, we just have to accept, like so many other things, unfortunately, in life. But I want to thank both of you guys for this conversation and obviously all the work it took to get to this point. Jill, thank you for sharing Zach's story and being so willing to talk honestly about what this process demanded from you, your family. I know it wasn't easy. I know it came at a cost. But I know there are a lot of parents listening who needed to hear that this kind of win is possible, as difficult as it is. Liz, of course, thank you for your advocacy, strategy, your steadiness I know you brought to this case, and you bring to all of us in the community. Families need people like you in their corner who understand the law and this world, and it's clear how much it mattered here. And I just want to say finally to Zach, your courage matters. Your decision to make this public matters. Your willingness to testify, to spell, to be seen, and to fight not only for yourself, but for other non-speakers matters. Thank you, Zach. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to the audience for joining us. Liz and Jill, again, thank you guys both for being on here. This was such a great discussion. We'll catch you all next time on the lighter side of the spectrum.